All right, I think people are trickling in, so I think we can begin. Good morning, afternoon, evening, to everyone who's joining the spaces today. Thank you so much for being a part of our discussion today. Today, we're going to pretty much be looking back at Optimism Summer and also look forward to what's next for Optimism with the different builders in the space. I'm Sam, I lead growth at Liquity, and I'm joined by Brees, who's the lead DeFi strategist at Liquity as well. And today we're joined by DeFi OG and I guess now the head of DeFi and founder of Synthetix, Kane from Synthetix. We're also joined by Alex, who is the founder of Velodrome Finance on Optimism. And we're also joined by Tao, who leads the community side of things at Optimism and as well. So guys, thank you so much for joining. And maybe we can I think the best way for us to start would be Kane. I guess if you could do a quick introduction into Synthetix, what it is. Now there's a whole ecosystem behind it on Optimism as well. But I guess for people who are just learning about Synthetix, if you can give a quick intro into Synthetix, that'd be a great start.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. So Synthetix is a platform that allows you to have tokens that track the price of off-chain assets or assets that are not on Ethereum. So things like gold, silver, Bitcoin, a bunch of other assets, forex currencies, etc. And the way that that works is people stake SNX and other collateral in order to issue those assets. And Synthetix was one of the first projects to start migration towards Optimism.
Cool. Thanks for that, Kane. Alex, I guess if you could provide a bit of intro into Velodrome as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. Good morning, everybody. Forgive me, it is early here, so I'm sipping pretty hard on my coffee. Hopefully, my brain is catching up here. But Velodrome is an automated market maker. I think the simplest way we like to describe it is that it is one that combines some of the best and most effective elements from UniV2, from Curve and Convex into a single AMM that is focused on providing deep liquidity on key ecosystem pairs and low fee, low slippage swaps. I'm sure if anybody's familiar with us, they already know this, but for those who are maybe not, we are, of course, built off of the Solidly model, which was Andre Croney's sort of last big hurrah in DeFi. It launched on Phantom earlier this year, but we essentially took that model, looked at everything that we saw that worked really well, sort of kept it, upgraded it. But there was also, of course, a number of sort of bugs or mechanism problems in Solidly, and so we adjusted those as well and launched in the Optimism ecosystem about, I guess I want to say, 3 months ago.
Cool. Thanks, Alex. One note thing that I noticed, Kane, recently is having been on Optimism, having used it for a while now. There's a whole ecosystem around Synthetix that's being built. I see different dApps like Quenta. I see there's another one called Polynomial, I think. There's another one called Thales. So it seems like there's a whole kind of system being built around SUSD. If you could kind of provide some light as to, how they're all interlinked and what the whole ecosystem, what you're trying to build there, that'd be what is the SNX ecosystem look like really?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is there are certain things you can do with SUSD when you use it as the stable coin within your protocol that are quite beneficial. So, for example, Lyra, which is an options protocol, uses SUSD as collateral, and that allows them to take control of the SUSD collateral, and within their contracts exchange the SUSD into BTC, ETH, and other assets as a way of hedging the options exposure within the AMM, which you kind of, you could do with other assets, but you'd have to go out to like external systems, which would, add some risk, etc. And so, this way, people who deposit SUSD can be sort of, certain that the assets are not going to be taken out and moved into some other protocol, or have something done to them, which gives you some assurances. And then on top of Lyra polynomials built, which is vaults, Quenta is like a front end for the perps market that Synthetix supports. So there's a bunch of different aspects of Synthetix that different dApps are tapping into, basically. And then things like dailies and some of the other markets that have kind of popped up around there use SUSD as their stable coins, basically. They don't necessarily need the functionality, but on Optimism, it's one of the, I guess, most liquid decentralized stable coins, depending on what you're looking for, I guess.
Thanks for that. I guess what would be good to know is as well, like what's I see like some proposals around Synthetix SIPs around the inflation, and also one other thing that I wanted to touch on was when you go on crypto fees, you see that the fees that you guys have been making since, I guess, since the height of the bear market has been pretty much in the top 10 consistently. Would you say there's any single thing that you'd attribute to that? Would you say is that I think you adopted something called atomic swaps recently as well? Is that one of the reasons as to why you see that Synthetix holders are getting quite a big chunk of this revenue, or would you say it's kind of a mixture of different things, and you're the whole ecosystem growing as well?
I think it's a mixture of a few things. I think it's the launch of atomic swaps, which actually happened quite a while ago, but the sort of optimization of atomic swaps, which is still ongoing. In fact, there's still probably somewhere between 10 and 20x improvement that can be generated from that, with some of the upcoming changes that are being made. And then perps launched on Optimism, so those markets have been increasing, and the open interest caps and other kind of security measures have been slowly wound back a little bit, dialed back. So we're seeing a growth in volume, in its kind of spot volume on Optimism, but predominantly perp volume on Optimism, and then atomic swap volume on L1. That said, we do expect that atomic swap volume on L2 will also grow over time, as liquidity increases. But at the moment, in low liquidity, it's not quite as valuable. But we are seeing more AMMs popping up and more liquidity, and as that happens, it's going to become more beneficial to route through Synthetix.
Cool, thanks. Alex, on the velodrome side of things, I think some of us know it as having super low slippage in terms of doing transactions and whatnot. But what do you guys have planned in the roadmap for the next, I guess, 3 to 6 months or so when it comes to optimizing the dApp? I know you guys are very new, and to be fair, in such a short amount of time, you've kind of become the leading AMM on Optimism. It would be good to hear your thoughts as to what's next for Velodrome and where you plan to kind of add functionalities and different features.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question. So, I think our primary focus right now is really still tied to the mandate that the Optimism Foundation gave us when they initially sort of bootstrapped us and we're trying to bring us over to the Optimism ecosystem, which is to deepen, both attract and deepen L2 liquidity. The Optimism Foundation talked a lot with us early on about how whenever they spoke to projects on Optimism and sort of asked them what is the biggest sort of like gap or inhibitor to, really the kind of exponential growth that they wanted to create, that they would often say that it is the sort of depth of liquidity. And so that is why we sort of saw, and Optimism saw the Solidly model initially as a good one to potentially adapt and bring into the ecosystem. Is, Solidly was designed to sort of serve as that ecosystem public good, that base liquidity layer that was able to sort of build that deep liquidity on key ecosystem pairs. But I do actually think one other thing that's really interesting about the intersection of that model and the Optimism ecosystem and the Synthetix ecosystem in particular is that, of course, most folks probably know this, but the rumor was that Andre really built Solidly to be the sort of base liquidity layer for perhaps his own, network of synthetic assets that could drive things like Forex trading and that sort of stuff in a way that provided deep liquidity on those sort of like synthetic asset pairs that provided the low fee, low slip swaps. And so I think, like, for us personally right now, like deepening Synthetix ecosystem liquidity is probably one of our main focuses, and we've been working with the team to hopefully do that. SUSD liquidity, Synthetix token liquidity, SETH liquidity, and we think we can sort of continue to drive, growth and depth of that liquidity on the ecosystem, combined with, of course, other AMMs like Curve and Uniswap v3, because we really think if we can help provide that depth, then we will bring more and more of the traders from layer one to Optimism, bring more of that like atomic swap volume and sort of things like that onto L2, and those would be the things that will really unlock growth for the entire ecosystem. We do have some other features or roadmappy things that we're building on, but I think that is our primary focus right now. It's just continuing to attract more projects, more economic activity, and more liquidity to Optimism and layer 2.
Cool, thanks, Alex. And I guess one of those projects that you are attracting in terms of liquidity on layer 2 is LUSD and Liquity. Token Breeze, I guess if you could provide, the guests here and also the people who have joined with some opportunities with LUSD and Optimism layer 2, what we're planning to build there, what we're planning to do there. I think that'd be good for everyone.
Sure, and maybe just some context, because I think the history is interesting in kind of validating what Alex was saying. So Liquity is a mainnet protocol only, meaning that if you want to borrow LUSD or burn it to redeem your collateral, you have to be on mainnet. But a lot of our users were asking about LUSD on sidechains or rollups because they wanted access to the resiliency it provides, but they didn't have the budget to store back the gas cost of mainnet. And so we were looking into rollups and L2 we could use. But I want to say it's pretty much Synthetix and Velodrome that brought us to Optimism more than the other way around. So about a year ago, Synthetix made a proposal to use LUSD as in a wrapper for SUSD to help stabilize its peg. And so it brought a lot of LUSD on the Optimism chain, which made us eligible for the initial VE NFT airdrop of Velodrome, allowing us to grow a very decent liquidity pool there at no cost. So it's really like the conjunctions of both projects that helped us get a foothold on Optimism. And then, so for our strategy on Velodrome, we were actually one of the very first racers. We've been in the races since the very first day. Initially, it was focused on growing a pool against USDC. It's not the best or ideal choice, but it's the most practical. So we did that for the first few weeks. At some point, it was even one of the top pool on Optimism, on Velodrome. Still is, I think, even if the TVL is a bit lower. But right now, we are actually in a process of diversifying the liquidity against stablecoins that are a bit more aligned with our principles of decentralization and trustlessness. And so we launched a couple of weeks ago 2 pools, one against SUSD and another against May from KeyDAO. And now both of them are live, and the incentive should be coming up in the next few weeks. So for holders of LUSD on Optimism, those could be quite decent opportunities. I think they're still like 12 or 13% APR, something like that. And KeyDAO kind of had a heavy hand on the bribe for the next round. So the May LUSD pool should be going up quite a lot in terms of return. On the Synthetix side, we also have, it's taking just a bit more time, but it should be coming soon. But yeah, what I find very interesting with Velodrome is the control it gives to project in this kind of choices. So we can direct the liquidity thanks to the initial voting power we got. And that's really something of note, because you don't really have that on other dexes. You have to acquire the position. And so I think this is really one of the high selling point for Velodrome. And not only it's efficient, but as a protocol or liquidity supporting activity on Velodrome is actually generating income, when on most other dexes, it's a cost.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've seen you tweet about it a few times, and I do think it's maybe one of the more maybe still relatively unknown benefits of the flywheel on Velodrome. And I don't know, Tao, do you want to talk maybe just a little bit more about that flywheel and how it can support, in particular, probably some of these stable players?
Yeah, definitely. So the way we see Velodrome is a sort of like a 3-sided platform. On the one hand, you have the traders, as Alex mentioned earlier, that will come in and generate fees on the protocol by swapping the tokens that we provide liquidity for. The second is for liquidity providers themselves, who can come in on Velodrome and farm. And the way the protocol works is that we emit Velo tokens continuously, and it goes to the liquidity pools, but the people that select which liquidity pools receive Velo tokens are the holders of locked Velo, VE Velo. So there's a sort of like value that comes back to anybody that farms Velo, because you can then lock it and direct more tokens to the liquidity pools, or you can basically sell it on the market to anybody that wants to lock it. And so the third side of the platform is protocols that can come in, acquire Velo, kind of accumulate a sizable piece of the total Velo or locked Velo, because then they can come on and lock it, and then incentivize their own liquidity. Or alternatively, protocols can bribe those pools. Bribing is basically depositing a token, whether it's their own token or a token that is, perhaps a USDC or ETH, to attract voters. So voters, who are the people that have locked Velo, they receive all the bribes that are deposited on the pool, and also all the fees, 100%. So there's a lot of value that comes back to Velo, and it all focuses on the token itself. And that way, by focusing, again, everything on the token, you sort of have a sort of funnel where anybody that wants to participate in the Velo wars, which is kind of directing liquidity or directing incentives to the key, whatever liquidity pools they think is best. Again, protocols can do it, or us as well. We strategically use our locked Velo, as Alex mentioned earlier, to incentivize the pools that we know will have value in the long term. It gives you that kind of control over, again, where you want liquidity. And I would say the core of it, we have also UniV3 on Optimism. Curve has also an iteration of their protocol on Optimism. And so I would say that the core of our strengths are, 1, stable swaps, and 2, tokens for protocols that perhaps haven't had traction or are just launching or want to support liquidity on Optimism, but perhaps have only come to the network recently and find it kind of hard for them to support liquidity on UniV3, where in a way it's up to the LPs to manage that liquidity. They have to do it strategically as well. So on Velodrome, they have control. They can just come in and provide the incentives, and it becomes like a really capital efficient tool for protocols to keep their liquidity pairs incentivized, right? And as a comment on Synthetix, we do see the opportunity of, as Alex mentioned, just building up those key pairs with the Synthetix assets. We have SUSD, USDC, plus ETH, synthetic ETH, building it up over time, because we know that when you consider the route that Atomic Swaps takes is you usually swap the stable swap, USDC for SUSD, then the synthetic asset is swapped on one of the platforms on Cuenta, and then you can swap the volatile asset like ETH, so synthetic ETH to ETH. So it's like a two-step or three-step route that it takes. That we know that as you build up liquidity by having those stable swaps ready, the slippage comes down and the fees already on Optimism are low. So that's where you can really start competing with mainnet by having lower fees with perhaps comparable or getting closer to comparable liquidity. So yeah, it's we hope that we can continue maintaining some traction. It's been going well so far. We've seen protocols bridging over from different chains over to Optimism to kind of stabilize their liquidity or kind of start supporting their liquidity on Optimism. And we hope that as an ecosystem grows, we can also grow with it as that layer that the protocols can come into and again kind of focus their efforts for liquidity on the platform.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth to maybe remind the audience that Velodrome is so young. It's 3 months old. So I'm really interested to see how it's going to evolve in the longer term. But as you were saying, yeah, the first results we're seeing are quite encouraging. And one thing that I find very interesting about the model is that essentially compared to a classic curve model, you keep the idea of enabling people to vote for whatever pool they want, so it's free on that side. But then you avoid the problem of misaligned incentives, because if someone votes massively on a pool that has very little volume, okay, the pool will have a decent APR, but the voter will make close to nothing because the voter is making earning fees coming from the trading fees. And so it avoids situations that we have seen in other similar models. So recently on Twitter, I was talking about something that was quite insane to me, is on Balancer, for instance, they had the cream money market that is borderline a scam, but that's for anyone to make their own opinion, but a very shady project that captured like a fourth of the total incentives of Balancer for months long. And the pool had no volume. It was a token for a dead project. So, that's a very bad look when you come on a platform and the top pool you see is this kind of pool. And it's also an other inefficient use of the BAL token, because it's essentially being given away to people that contribute close to no liquidity to the exchange itself. So the twist of Solidly Velodrome kind of fixes that, because they get almost no income if they do that.
Yeah, you got it. That was one of Andre's first points, right? In those initial blog posts, was that he wanted an AMM model that did not reward passive or unproductive liquidity in the way that we've seen with some other models like Curve. I hadn't actually paid attention to that balancer example, but that's super interesting as well. But Tao, did you want to jump in there too?
Yeah, I was just going to say, funnily enough, it was also one of Sally's core issues, that people could actually create dummy tokens that they held the entire liquidity for, and just vote for a pair of those tokens and receive all the emissions, right? So that broke sort of the flywheel for Silently, but here we're taking a more careful approach to token whitelisting. So that's allowing basically only productive tokens to be on the platform and be able to receive emissions, and it's working well so far.
Thanks, guys. One question I had, and considering you guys have now built on Optimism for a while, is how has that experience been? I guess, Kane, if you could, how you were one of the first projects, I think, that actually started building on Optimism. How has it been working on Optimism from, I guess, a developer perspective, and also from a community perspective as well?
Yeah, I think, we started building on Optimism before it was live, right? So, we've definitely been through some ups and downs, and we were very close with, the Optimism team as they were kind of developing things and making some changes and kind of pivoting the model and some of this other stuff. So, it was definitely an investment, a kind of mutual investment that I think Optimism made in us and we made in them, because, you need, I guess, a kind of smart contract suite perspective to understand how a network is going to really be used. And so I think we were able to give that to them. Once we got to the point where all of the regenesis processes were done and everything, I think it's become much easier subsequently. But definitely in the early days there was a lot of effort from everyone to kind of get things to where we are today. Now you can kind of turn up and take a mainnet contract and dump it on an Optimism. It works pretty smoothly. So definitely a much better place to be today than we were, let's say, a year ago, which is obviously nice for everyone, especially the new projects.
Yeah, I imagine our process to come over was a fair bit easier than y'all's.
Yeah, definitely. Although I think you guys do a pretty good job of having fairly straightforward contracts, so it's not maybe as crazy as the 150 Synthetix contracts around mainnet or whatever it is.
Can't even imagine.
Token briefs. I guess one question the audience wants to know as well is what's coming for LUSD and Optimism? I know we're on Velodrome now. We've got a couple of pools there, but what else can we expect for LUSD?
Yeah, so we have a cool roadmap pending up. Velodrome was a bit of the first step, as liquidity is a requirement for pretty much everything else. Now we have another requirement we are working on, which is having a Chainlink price feed on Optimism. And then on sets in, we already have a couple of protocols that voted on the DAO to support LUSD as collateral on Optimism too. So that's Mimo and Anger. And then there is another flow that I'm quite excited about, which is getting LUSD on Avi Optimism, because this one opens up a lot of new possibilities. The two main ones being pool together. So pool together works with a yield source, usually Avi or Compound. So right now they cannot add an LUSD vault on Optimism, but if we have Avi, they will be able to. And so that's something that has been requested a lot. It's going to be a cool story because, like, I don't know, every couple of months or something on the Pool Together Discord, someone pings me and is like, hey, when LUSD on Pool Together? Seems like a lot of people want to play with that. And another one we're discussing right now, but still kind of needs to be specified a bit, but should be realistic once we have Avi, which is KeyDAO. So another lending protocol that uses for stablecoin usually their Avi version, so ALUSD. So that would be an interesting one because essentially you have a ALUSD collateral producing an income that you can use to borrow May and produce some more yields with those May. So yeah, I'm quite excited for what's coming up on Optimism as soon as we clear this Chainlink Oracle requirement.
That's very exciting, especially the Aave one. I guess one other question in terms of new products, new versions, etc. Synthetix V3. Kane, obviously I've heard some different uh, on different forums, on different interviews, etc. Information on SNX V3 as being something that soon TM, I guess, in terms of when it's going to come out. But if you can give some light as to what one can expect with the new version of Synthetix when it does come out, I guess that'd be great. And yeah, I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, so no comment on timelines, obviously, but things are going along fairly well for now. We haven't hit any huge roadblocks. The architecture is done. I mean, the primary thing that Synthetix V3 does, at least in my mind, right? Like, this is someone who's lived with the current version of Synthetix since like late 2018, is it takes a bunch of the mechanisms and components that exist within the current system and replaces them with much more efficient and straightforward versions. So, back in 2018, there were a whole bunch of things that they just weren't off-the-shelf components or even like well thought out approaches to solving problems, to the point where we didn't even get, staking rewards.sol, which like distributes tokens in continuous time on chain until, late 2019 or something like that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that exists in the Synthetix system that is really difficult to replace without, putting the entire system at risk. So a decision was made that we get to a point where we just do a feature freeze on V2X, and then we would do a bunch of R&D on all of the different aspects, all the different components that are required for Synthetix to work. So adding collateral to the system, reward distribution, all of the stuff, and look at whatever the state of the art is in terms of how to implement those kinds of mechanisms on chain, and basically replace it all in one fell swoop, fix all the mechanisms, get it much simpler, much more straightforward, much more efficient, and then from there, having built the existing system or rebuild the existing system with much more efficient mechanisms, we would then start adding additional functionality and incremental functionality on top of it. So it's likely going to go something like Synthetix V3, which will kind of preserve the existing synths and some of the other stuff that's in the system, and then like 3.1 will add some cool stuff like permissionless pools, and then 3.2, 3.3, etc. So it's going to still be incremental upgrades from here, but the primary thing is kind of replacing the existing functionality in the current system in kind of holistic and efficient way.
Cool, thank you very much. I guess now we can open up for Q&A. So if anyone in the spaces would like to ask a question to any of our guests, please do just raise your hand and I'll give you the mic to ask a question. Chloe, I see you raise your hand. I've just given you approval.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for hosting the space. Very interesting. I do have a question for Villatron. I see that you have a lot of collaborations with different protocols. So my question would be, would you please talk a little bit more about the, let's say, next year's plan going forward? Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to touch on that. Yeah, so as we mentioned at the top, Optimism brought us in to try to help to be that base layer of liquidity for the entire ecosystem. And that was both with an eye towards deepening the liquidity and sort of lowering the cost of liquidity for existing ecosystem players like the broader Synthetix ecosystem, but it was also to make it very, very easy for new projects new protocols, whether they're kind of like net new or whether they are coming over from other Alta L1s or from mainnet, make it very easy for them to bootstrap their initial liquidity and deploy on Optimism. So I think much of our focus currently is just on helping all of those projects on board. And I think, we've taken note of all the different protocols, projects, tokens we brought on board. And right now I think we brought like another 17 or so onto the network. And frankly, we still have a ton of folks who you might say are in our pipeline. So they are currently working to deploy. It's in process. We might have another pool or protocol or two even this week who are sort of new to the ecosystem and bribing. And really, like, that is the most essential thing, not only to the ecosystem, but to Velodrome, because Velodrome only works if there is a sort of thriving ecosystem around it. As like Token Bryce said at the beginning, it is very possible for projects and protocols to essentially turn their liquidity costs into revenue drivers because all of the sort of fees and bribe revenue go to voters. And so our hope would be that, every major name in crypto, every major project in crypto has Optimism deployment, and they are using Velodrome for its base layer of liquidity. Beyond that, though, we do have a number of things that we want to potentially do. So if anybody is a user of Curve and Convex Vodium on mainnet, that they pioneered this great model that allows, I think in particular, sort of retail participants to participate in the Curve Convex flywheel, but to do it in a very passive way, or I guess you could say like, maybe a profit maxi way, where you can take your vote lock Convex, delegate it to Vodium. Vodium does all the work for you to sort of optimize your votes, distribute your votes optimally across bribes. And then, they take all that bribe revenue, which comes in sort of the native tokens, they compound it for you and just sort of allow you to let your votes, sort of produce all of this token value back. So we have something similar that we are looking to create. If you want to check out our Medium, there's a post on there called Velodrome Relay. But the idea is that you would be able to sort of take your VE NFT and the voting power that represents. You could delegate it to Velodrome Relay. Velodrome Relay will sort of look at which pools are delivering the best fee revenue, the best bribe revenue, and then distribute your votes optimally across those pools. This helps not only that sort of like retail experience and that you can just sort of let your votes passively vote for the best pools, but it also helps to sort of optimize the system, right? And making sure that the most votes and thus the most emissions are going to the most productive pools. So that's one thing that we definitely have in mind, and we've got some other stuff that we're working on as well that we're excited about. We'll be able to talk about in time.
Beautiful, thank you. That was very detailed. Thank you very much. And Liquity, I know you are really one of the best stable protocols. I am curious if
thank you.
have.
Sorry.
Okay, everything okay?
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
I think I got a delay. So what was your question?
Yes, the question would be, do you have plans to go cross-chain? If so, which one would you choose?
Yeah, it's a bit of a complex question for Liquity, because as I was saying earlier, so the protocol is powered by immutable contracts, so contracts that cannot be modified. and they're deployed on mainnet. So it adds a lot of barriers to launching a new chain. If we want to launch the protocol itself on the chain there, pretty much essentially requires a V2 of the protocol. But one thing we can do is, like we were doing right now on Optimism, is bridging the LUSD stablecoin there. That's already a good first step. Now, there is not a concern, but something to watch for, which is, again, the liquidations happen on mainnet. So we need to make sure there are like fast bridging solutions available from whichever chain LUSD is bridged to, so that if one day there is a bloodbath on the ETH price, those LUSD that are on sidechains or rollup can be quickly brought back to mainnet to help facilitate those liquidations. So that's one of the things we have to watch for. But yeah, there is definitely a lot of demand from the community to access LUSD in a more cost-effective solution. And there is one approach that particularly gets me excited is, so I don't know what is the status on this, but it's from Aztec Network. They're working on something called Aztec Connect. And the idea is to have a roll-up, so where transaction fees are very reasonable, but that essentially batch interactions that are then translated onto the layer one. So we will enable people to interact with mainnet liquidity from a rollup, and that makes it, really effective in terms of cost for the users, but also streamline the integration for us, because the rollup is essentially integrating with mainnet liquidity, and we don't have to deploy and manage an instance of liquidity on another rollup or sidechain. So that's probably the main gateway for providing access to liquidity on cost-effective rollup sidechains. Would be solutions like that pull interactions back to the L1. And so, yeah, Aztec Connect should be coming shortly, but I think the roadmap got a bit modified as they had to implement a bit more compliance-related features after the Tornado Cash event. But yeah, they rolled out the integration with the first batch of protocol a few weeks ago, and Liquity should be in the second batch.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. If no one has more question, I'm curious, what do you guys do apart from work? Are you meditating? Are you spiritual? Like, what type of relaxation do you do?
I think Tao does some meditating.
Yeah, I think crypto in particular can be a space where it's very helpful to have ways of bringing down kind of like the intensity of your mind. So I like running a lot. I try to meditate from time to time. I take certain, call it mind medicines that help me also chill down from time to time. But yeah, I think it's really hard to disconnect, especially when you're building something on crypto, because it's 24/7. There's always something that comes up, even on the weekends. So it's really good to try to, when you get the chance, really, find an outlet, be outside, whatever it is, spend time with the family, and because it's also more sustainable. You can stick around longer and stay optimistic, right? Especially right now in the bear market, where it sometimes feels like we're not going to get a chance to, or like basically the macro is against crypto in a way. But by staying kind of centered, focused, you can sort of see the big picture in the long term.
Yeah, totally agree. Well said. Thank you for sharing. Agreed. I'm also doing a lot of meditation. I think it really is beneficial if you have the. I think we have to make time for it. Of course, life is busy, But when you do make some time for that, it's going to make your life or daily your every single day more more peaceful, more grounded, more productive, more grateful. And I mean, speaking from my own experience, I'm Chinese, so for a Chinese to be able to say this, so you understand, there are benefits, and there are so many. If you haven't started, I really, really urge you to give a try. Just when you wake up, 10 minutes, open your eyes. First thing you do, meditate 10 minutes. Before you go to bed, 10 minutes. That's it. If you can, what I do now, I get up at 5 o'clock, watch the sunrise. That gives you a lot, enormous of energy. And during the day, if you're out, please don't use sunglasses. Of course, depends on where you are. If you live somewhere, if it's 40-degree, yeah, of course, you have to protect your eyes. But during the morning and the late evening, let your eyes see the sunlight, because the light is going to go through your body, through the eye. If you always using sunglasses, you are blocking the light. So give a try, you will see the effects.
Thank you for that, Chloe. I guess that's a pretty good way to wrap up the spaces for today. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you for the guests for joining as well. It's such an early time. We will be having another spaces tomorrow at 4 p.m. UTC, where we'll be talking about with longtime DeFi OGs and users on their feedback on the protocol, what they'd like to see in DeFi, and what's next in store for stablecoins. So please join us for that. We'll be joined by OGs like Eric, Voorhees, Mariano Conti, Barry, Fried, and also Robert, the founder of Liquity. But regardless, thank you all for joining today. I hope you learned a lot. This Spaces is recorded, so you'll be able to listen to it on if you'd like to again. But regardless, have a great day, and thanks all for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Cheers. This was an interesting chat.